The file in front of you was never officially closed. The investigators moved on. The witnesses stopped talking. The leads ran dry, but the case never closed. What you are about to hear has been documented. The timeline, the evidence, the questions that were never answered. Welcome to case number unknown. Let's open the file. For 22 years, one of the most damaging spies in American history walked into FBI headquarters every single morning, sat at his desk, and betrayed his country before lunch. His name was Robert Philip Hanssen, and he wasn't some foreign operative slipping through the shadows. He was one of the Bureau's own, a counterintelligence agent, a man whose literal job was to catch spies, and all the while, he was selling America's most closely guarded secrets to the Soviet Union and later Russia, causing untold damage to national security and sending at least 3 people to their deaths. To understand how this betrayal began, you have to go back to 1944, when Robert Hanssen was born in Chicago, Illinois, to a family that was anything but warm. His father, Howard Hanssen, was a Chicago police officer, a man described by those who knew him as domineering, emotionally abusive, and relentlessly critical of his only son. Robert grew up desperate for approval he would never receive. He was brilliant, socially awkward, deeply religious, and consumed by contradictions that would define his entire life. He studied chemistry and Russian at Knox College, then earned an MBA, and briefly worked as an accountant and a Chicago police officer before joining the FBI in 1976. It was in January of 1976 that Hanssen reported for duty at the FBI's field office in Gary, Indiana. He was assigned to white-collar crime initially, but it wasn't long before his aptitude for analysis and his knowledge of Russian drew the attention of the counterintelligence division. By 1979, he was transferred to the FBI's New York field office, working directly on matters involving Soviet intelligence. He was now inside the machine. He had access to some of the most sensitive, compartmented information in the United States government, and almost immediately, he began to betray it. In 1979, just 3 years into his FBI career, Robert Hanssen walked into the offices of the GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence, at the Soviet trade organization Amtorg in New York City, and offered his services. He didn't use his real name. He used a dead drop system. He provided classified information about Soviet defectors who were cooperating with the United States. Among those he compromised was Dmitry Polyakov, a Soviet general who had been secretly working as a source for the FBI and CIA for years. Polyakov was one of the most valuable assets Western intelligence had ever recruited. Hanssen's betrayal was a death sentence. Polyakov was eventually arrested by the KGB, interrogated, and executed by firing squad in 1988. But Hanssen's first foray into espionage nearly came to an end before it truly began. In 1980, his wife Bonnie discovered cash he couldn't explain and confronted him. Hanssen confessed to her that he had been in contact with the Soviets, but he told her it was essentially a scam, that he had fed them worthless information and taken their money. He promised her he would stop. Bonnie, a devout Catholic, insisted he confess to a priest. He did. The priest, an Opus Dei member, told him to donate the money to charity and sin no more. No authority was ever contacted. No investigation was ever opened. And Robert Hanssen did not stop. There was a brief pause after his wife's discovery, but by 1985, Hanssen was back. And this time, he went bigger. In October 1985, he sent an anonymous letter to a KGB officer in Washington, D.C., offering a treasure trove of intelligence. He identified himself only by a code name and insisted all communication happen through dead drops, packages left at prearranged locations in parks and underpasses throughout the suburbs of Virginia and Maryland. He never once met his handlers face to face. This was an extraordinary precaution, one that would keep him invisible for years, where other spies had been caught through personal contact. The scale of what Hanssen delivered is staggering. Over the course of his espionage career, he handed over more than 6,000 pages of classified documents. He revealed the existence of a secret tunnel the FBI and NSA had built beneath the Soviet embassy in Washington to intercept communications, a project that had cost hundreds of millions of dollars and years of effort. He exposed the identities of dozens of human intelligence sources working for the United States. He provided details about American nuclear war contingency plans, signals intelligence programs, and the technical methods used to track Soviet agents. He gave the Russians a complete copy of the U.S. intelligence community's National Human Collection Plan. The damage assessment conducted after his arrest concluded that his espionage was possibly the worst intelligence disaster in U.S. history, and through it all, nobody suspected him. Part of this was by design. Hanssen was meticulous. He never used his real name with his handlers. He never traveled to Moscow. He used encrypted communications and sophisticated tradecraft that he had, ironically, learned through his own counterintelligence training. But part of it was also the culture of the FBI itself. The Bureau had long believed it was immune to penetration. The CIA might have moles, they thought, but not the FBI. This institutional arrogance created a blind spot so vast that Hanssen operated within it for over 2 decades. His personal life was a web of contradictions that should have raised red flags. He was a deeply devout member of Opus Dei, attending Mass almost daily, yet he was secretly filming his intimate moments with his wife and sharing the footage with a close friend. He frequented strip clubs. He developed an obsessive relationship with a woman in Washington, lavishing her with gifts purchased with Soviet money. He lived modestly in a 4-bedroom house in Vienna, Virginia, but he was receiving payments from Moscow totaling more than $1.4 million in cash and diamonds over the years. His colleagues found him arrogant and difficult to work with, but no one ever imagined he was a traitor. The turning point came not through brilliant detective work, but through money. In the late 1990s, the FBI and CIA knew they had a mole. Assets were being compromised, operations were failing, and the intelligence community was hemorrhaging secrets. A joint investigation was launched under the code name Greysuit. Initially, the investigation focused on a CIA officer named Brian Kelly, who was placed under intense surveillance for years. Kelly was innocent. The real break came in 2000, when the United States paid a former Russian intelligence officer more than $7 million for a file that the KGB had compiled on their American mole. The file didn't contain Hanssen's name, but it contained a plastic bag with his fingerprints and an audio recording of his voice from a phone call with his handler. FBI analysts matched the voice. The fingerprints confirmed it. It was Robert Hanssen. The FBI placed Hanssen under surveillance in late 2000. They assigned a new assistant to him, an undercover agent named Eric O'Neill, whose sole job was to monitor Hanssen's every move from inside his own office. O'Neill later described Hanssen as paranoid, brilliant, and deeply unsettling to be around. For weeks, the surveillance team watched, waited, and built their case. On February 18, 2001, Robert Hanssen drove to Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia, to make what would be his final dead drop. He taped a package of classified documents to the underside of a wooden footbridge. As he walked back to his car, a team of FBI agents emerged from the woods. Hanssen looked at them and said only 6 words that would become infamous in the annals of espionage. He said, quote, "What took you so long?" end quote. He was arrested on the spot and charged with 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy. Facing the death penalty, Hanssen cooperated with investigators in exchange for a plea deal that spared his life. He pleaded guilty in July 2001 to 15 counts of espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, and conspiracy. On May 10, 2002, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called his crimes the most traitorous actions imaginable. Robert Hanssen was sent to the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, the same facility that houses some of the most dangerous criminals in American history. He spent his days in near-total isolation, confined to a 7-by-12-foot cell for 23 hours a day. In 2023, after more than 2 decades behind bars, Robert Hanssen was found dead in his cell. He was 79 years old. The Bureau of Prisons stated the cause of death was natural, though few details were released. The damage he caused can never be fully measured. At least 3 intelligence assets he betrayed were executed. Countless operations were compromised. Billions of dollars in intelligence programs were rendered useless. The FBI was forced to undergo its most painful internal reckoning in history, overhauling its counterintelligence procedures and implementing new security protocols that remain in place to this day. But perhaps the most unsettling question is the one that still lingers. For 22 years, Robert Hanssen sat in the heart of American counterintelligence, passing secrets to America's greatest adversary, and no one caught him. Not his colleagues, not his supervisors, not the polygraph examiners, because the FBI didn't even require polygraphs for its agents at the time. The system, designed to protect America's secrets, had a traitor at its core. And it raises a question that should keep every intelligence official awake at night. If it took 22 years to find Robert Hanssen, who else might still be out there, hiding in plain sight, betraying their country one dead drop at a time? The investigation is ongoing. If you have a case you think deserves a file, leave it in the comments. New files open every week. Subscribe, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes.